Hello, everyone. Great, great. It's nice to meet you in person. It's such a great place here in Miami, and I think in this tent someone put 2 megawatts of crypto mining because it's so hot here. Well, let me introduce myself first. My name is Sergii Gerasymovych. I am CEO of Easy Blockchain, and I'm going to be moderating a super nice panel. It's a heavyweights in Bitcoin mining, wasted energy, and beyond. We actually have the cleanest Bitcoin miner here on the stage. So before we do that, I really want to say a few words. We have the last panel, so we still have a little bit of time. I want to say big thanks to Brandon Green, Andrew Fisher, John Kristovich, and all BTC media team and Paperlight team. They organized such a great event. Let's give them a round of applause, guys. Remember, it's not only the largest Bitcoin event, it's also the largest live event in the United States after pandemic. Isn't that crazy? So let's start. Gentlemen, it's great to have you here. I think there is no one better to introduce you than yourself. So please, let's start with Marty.
Marty Bent. I am the Director of Business Development at Great American Mining, and we mine Bitcoin on oil fields.
I'm Steve Barbour. I'm the CEO and I guess chief and only engineer at Upstream Data. We all do a little bit similar thing. We mine Bitcoin using mostly waste gas and oil field.
I'm Chase Lochmiller. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Crusoe Energy, and like these guys, we use otherwise wasted gas in the oil field to generate power to mine Bitcoin.
Very nice, gentlemen. So in recent months, Bitcoin mining in particular has been targeted by media, governments, billionaires, and yet people figured out that Bitcoin mining used so much power only today. When BNY Mellon, PayPal, and MasterCard were embracing Bitcoin, they started to accept it. There were no headlines in Wall Street Journal that PayPal is killing the environment by starting accepting Bitcoin, right? So we are miners are blamed for every sin in energy today. And it's funny enough that this is not the first time. In 2014, after Mt. Gox collapse, Bitcoin miners were slammed because we kind of laundered money by approving transactions. 2017 and 18, after ICO bust, Bitcoin mining also was targeted. And now, of course, it's the biggest target that we're having into 2021 because of ESG and other agendas, I would say. So Steve, let me start with you. You're considered a grandfather of Bitcoin mining on natural gas. I wish you had the beard. So you installed multiple Bitcoin mining facilities on natural gas. Can you explain to the audience, what is it you do? What do you do with those Bitcoin mining things on well pads?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an oil field engineer by background, so always worked on production and the facility side of things. In the oil field, I mean, there's a ton of wasted energy when they're seeking to produce oil and ship it to market. So a couple examples, obviously flaring. Flaring is a big one, especially in the shale oil. A lot of that happening in the US and Canada as well. Flaring, venting. Actually, when I started my business, it was venting that I was mostly seeking out, because venting up in my neck of the woods was, by the way, venting is just before flaring. It's just seeping methane straight into the atmosphere. So it's much, much worse from the environmental standpoint. And also there's a lot more regulatory requirements coming down on producers who are venting. So it was more of a lower hanging fruit. So you got venting, you got flaring, but we go after stranded gas wells as well. So sitting gas wells, this is capital sunk in literally hundreds of thousands of wells across America and Canada, just sitting, doing nothing. So we try to help producers be more efficient, and Bitcoin mining is one way to do that.
Wow, this is fascinating. So you work directly with energy producers, and we all slam and talk about matter, energy, but you work with those people on a daily basis. So what do they say? Do they see Bitcoin mining harmful?
Do they see what?
Bitcoin mining as a harmful thing?
No, I mean, not in my experience. Oil and gas companies have already been pulled through the ringer on the emissions thing, and I think generally oil and gas folks and people working in the fossil fuels industry has a bit of a different perspective on it. So I've never had, I don't think in one of the thousands of calls over the years, a single oil and gas exec or engineer really push against us as being bad for the environment or something. They always saw it as maybe, okay, this is a fad. I'm not investing in this. This is too silly. It's gambling, whatever. There's been all kinds of things we've had to field, but I wouldn't say many of them are too worried about the emissions impact of Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. Very nice. So in the next question, I would like to touch on Bitcoin mining and emissions. Chase, that would be a question for you. So behind your back, we have those two interesting things having fire. What are those? Can you explain to the audience?
So up on the screen, you see two big flare stacks that are out in the oil field in North Dakota. And what's happening here is that an oil company's drilled oil wells to produce oil, but they have no economically or logistically feasible way to basically transport the associated gas that gets produced to a downstream market where it can be consumed. And so they're left with this situation where they need to actually just burn the gas on site. Steve talked a little bit about venting as well. Methane has a much higher global warming potential than CO2. So it actually heats the environment at an 83x multiple. So by fitting together Bitcoin mining with this midstream oil field problem, it actually creates a really unique solution that can be a huge win for the oil company by reducing the net emissions from each marginal barrel of oil they're producing. It creates a win for the environment by reducing the emissions associated with producing oil, and it creates a win for the Bitcoin miner because we're able to generate power in a completely off-grid, robust manner at globally competitive power prices.
Wow, that's fascinating. So we all heard that Bitcoin mining uses more power than Ireland, Austria, and it emits a bunch of emissions into the atmosphere. But what you're saying, Chase, that you actually curb emission with Bitcoin mining, isn't that?
Say it again?
You are curbing emissions with Bitcoin mining.
Exactly. So, I touched on it before, but, one thing that happens with flaring is that, Steve touched on venting, but, oftentimes with open flare stacks like you see here, you actually don't get full combustion of the methane. So by applying a solution like digital flare mitigation, where you're co-locating data centers with this oil field production, you actually end up with a 63% reduction in CO2 equivalent footprint, which actually means you have a carbon negative solution for Bitcoin mining.
Wow. So everyone has to take a note on this. They are mining carbon negative Bitcoin. I think Kevin already would be jealous of you guys. So this is interesting, but I am a journalist from nature.com, and I come here and I say, yeah, but you're still burning gas. What would you say? Marty.
I mean, that gas is going to be burnt otherwise, as you can see behind us, so you might as well get some positive economic value out of it, right? And
there's a handful of aspects there too, right? I mean, you're displacing downstream use, so you're displacing energy footprint that would otherwise be consumed by the grid, and you're actually getting full combustion of the methane, which again is one of the key emission reduction factors, right?
Wow. Well, Marty, I want to touch base on education and talk with you. You've been a great supporter of the industry. You have a big following base, and you happen to be in business of Bitcoin mining and natural gas. So one of your missions of your company is that you help to educate upstream oil and gas companies, help them to monetize their gas, bring down their emissions. So how do you do that? How do you educate them? What questions they ask you, And how do you work with them?
Well, it's a lot of phone calls, a lot of long discussions, right? Like oil and gas producers are focused on the minerals they're extracting from the earth, marketing them up and getting them to market. And gas historically has not been like a main focus. They're more focused on oil. So, like Chase mentioned, this is associated gas. It's a nuisance gas. Like they feel very comfortable flaring it here. So just trying to convince producers, like, hey, you do not need to waste this energy anymore. You can actually get some economic value out of it. And it's a hard sell. There's a lot of old dogs in the oil and gas industry, if you will, and it's hard to teach them new tricks, particularly about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is still seen as a risky asset in the eyes of a lot of producers, so it's trying to get them comfortable with Bitcoin itself, educate them about how it works, how mining works, how we benefit by using gas, and how they can benefit by mining. So it's a long road. We find that the most powerful way to have an aha moment materialize for a producer is to actually get a container on site, and you see the flare being reduced, you see the miners running, you hear them, you can touch the box, and it really like makes it real. And then you can show them how many Bitcoin are being produced, and it's like, oh, this actually makes sense. But it's a lot of education, a lot of conversations.
So we are talking about power consumption, and we talked about natural gas. So can you give an idea for the audience how big is the problem of flare gas, vented gas, and all other type of stranded gas? Sure. Anyone?
You got it.
Well, I'll give it a little perspective. I can't remember the exact numbers. It might be like 100 and I think it's like 140 odd billion cubic feet or something
It's
a year.
14.5 billion cubic feet a day get flared with no beneficial use. That's like the latest numbers from 2019. I don't think they've published the 2020 numbers.
That's only reported numbers too, right? And so
It's only reported numbers. So, putting in the perspective of power production, this is enough to basically power multiple Bitcoin networks. If all of that gas were harnessed, it's a really massive global scale problem. The World Bank has an initiative to end routine flaring by 2030. A number of major oil companies have signed on to this initiative. Most of the super majors, Saudi Aramco. So there's a lot of buy-in from the industry to solve this problem. But it's not a new problem, right? I mean, if you look at the EIA website, you can see the gas flaring statistics, and the reality is we've been flaring gas since we've been producing oil, and no one's ever been able to come up with an economically viable solution to it until now, when we have this sort of mobile, modular, interruptible power demand load that can generate profit co-located with the oil production, which I think is really what's very unique about the solution that we're discussing here today.
This is fascinating. Multiple Bitcoin network can be powered by flare gas, by those things, and yet we're still blamed on emitting CO2 into the air. Isn't that insane?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what's unique about Bitcoin, is that it can fit into very unique power resources and really can unlock value in stranded energy resources through this power of distributed computation and proof of work, which is really just like a beautiful, harmonious, connection there.
Yeah, and I would add, like, a lot of the FUD just comes from people honestly don't understand how the energy supply chain works and what we're doing specifically on the flared gas sites, but even miners using hydro that's been overproduced. Most people honestly don't know how energy extraction and marketing and getting that to market works, and that misunderstanding drives people to make lazy arguments like Bitcoin is bad for the environment.
It's not just, I've always advocated when we do our pitches, it's not just the waste gas that's a problem, it's waste capital or sunk capital. So you have, like I mentioned, like hundreds of thousands of sitting wells with sunk costs. They were drilled, many of them weren't even completed. So when you look at it from an emissions perspective, there was a lot of emissions output to invest in that infrastructure, those wells, and to have them literally do nothing, and then the government come in and subsidize their abandonment. In many cases, especially now in Canada, it's sort of a shame. A lot of those wells, the gas prices might not be good today, But tomorrow things might change, and there's a lot of abandonment going on with that. So I mean, we advocate and we push our clients to think of our solutions as ways to revitalize stranded gas assets as well. And on top of that, like especially up in Canada, we have many tens of thousands of engines that were they're natural gas aspirated engines to run the well site, but through downturns and especially this last downturn, which has been very difficult, a lot of these engines are idle. So now you have more stranded capital that, again, if you want to look at things from the emissions side of things, the carbon that was created building that stuff, like it was emitted for effectively no use. It's just sitting there now. So it's just a massive waste. So we really advocate to use what you have and get at it, make some money, boost the economy, and drive jobs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I was going to piggyback on what Steve there. Like, it really highlights that Bitcoin mining is like a conservationist movement. If you will, we're conserving these scarce energy molecules that are being wasted. I think as an industry, we need to start fighting back against this particular narrative and saying, no, we're actually making the world extremely energy efficient, and this is a conservationist movement. Bitcoin is the Green New Deal. Like, we're gonna,
I think, in the case of stranded gas wells, I think that's probably like an area that we would maybe take a different approach than you. I think fundamentally, like we're focused on helping facilitate like an energy transition, and I know, we see oil as an incredibly necessary commodity that we're going to need for many, many decades. We see this energy transition taking place over many decades and with many trillions of dollars of capital investment to make the Earth powered by entirely clean or renewable energy resources. But in sort of the in the time between now and then, we feel like it's a big responsibility to produce each marginal barrel of oil with the least amount of carbon footprint. And in the case of stranded gas wells, we feel like it's kind of by combusting those molecules, it's basically like adding additional demand to the system as opposed to basically capturing otherwise wasted gas.
Yeah, so we've had, even in producer meetings, they say the same thing, okay? Like, we go after this stranded gas, aren't we just increasing carbon? And you are. Like, if that's the only thing we're looking at. I mean, I personally, often in the media especially, we have this narrative that, there's decades left of oil or there's 100 years left. I don't see it going anywhere for a very long time, like many hundreds of years. Coal, in fact, as well, fossil fuels entirely, because you just have to look at things from the perspective that everything is made from fossil fuels. Like, this entire building, cement is made from coal, steel is made from coal. Everything is made from fossil fuels right now. It's almost like the entirety of human civilization is a stack on top of fossil fuels. To displace that in any reasonable time that a lot of people are saying that is within maybe our lifetime, like, the Elon Musks of the world think that we're on a fast track.
And we have questions about Elon, so.
Oh, we'll hate on Elon in a bit. But, I mean, the way I look at it is, first of all, I don't consider burning natural gas is that, dirty. Yes, it has CO2 emissions, but we seem to forget that there's another side of the equation. Like, there's the dirty aspect or the carbon aspect, but what about the utility aspect? If you go invest money in setting up if a producer invests money in setting up a gas well to mine Bitcoin, he can't take that capital, duplicate it, and spend it elsewhere. So the money invested in one thing is now off the table in something else. So there's another, whatever emissions that would have been put into somewhere else is no longer on the table. So it's not as simple as a lot of the green energy terrorists are making it out to be.
Thank you, Steve. Well, so I think for the round one questions about oil and gas, it's definitely a fix. Bitcoin mining is a fix for oil and gas industry. There's no questions about it. You guys answered everything. Let's move a little bit to other uses of energy. So when my company first built an on-grid location in a very small town, we were praised by utility because we could provide them a consistent supply of power, so they could actually see how much they need to go and buy on the market, and thus the prices to a local community didn't go up because they bought power in bulk. So talking about utilities and grids, how Bitcoin mining, constant demand of power 24/7, can help to balance the grids, balance the loads, balance the power plants, as well as help solar and wind power plants to grow more. It's for the whole panel, guys. What do you think?
Sure.
Marty?
No, go ahead, Jace.
I'll make one comment on it. Like, I find that I've always find it funny that, like, because you can control the load of a Bitcoin mine just through software.
Yep.
And Bitcoin mining, as beautiful as it is, it's portable. You can put it at any energy source. If you had, say, an army of plebs mining in their basement, which now is, of course, not economically feasible, but an army of plebs could run the same software, maybe it's slush pool software, integrated with the energy grids pricing, and it doesn't have to be at a central location. So I always find it funny when these big mining institutions who put these monster, 300 megawatt facilities in Texas and that talk about load balancing. Well, you're not really doing much better than you can do if it's widely distributed on the same grid. So that's one comment I wanted to make.
The only difference with if it's a bunch of people distributed in the basement is you can't coordinate the interruptibility of it, right? Versus if it's centrally controlled, like at a larger facility, the demand response mechanism can kind of work.
Well, I just meant like if in theory, like everyone was running. I'm repping slush pool, so if they're all running their API and their API synced everybody, like that could be a solution, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's anywhere feasible in the near term. In fact, I don't think it is. But in the very long term, maybe.
So back to your original question, I think access to cheap and widely available energy has been the most transformative technology that's ever happened in the human race. Over the last 150 years, the quality of life has been uplifted so much by access to energy. Steve talked a little bit about materials. I don't think there's any person in the world that doesn't use almost on a daily basis something that's produced from oil and gas, and that's really led to tremendous value. But I do think that we are going to sort of enter this era of energy transition as we build out more solar, more wind, more nuclear, more hydro, during that phase, I think Bitcoin mining, because of its unique properties of being a way of monetizing power in an interruptible fashion, make it very, very uniquely suited to basically help create more economic development for further renewable projects. So overbuilding renewables to support greater grid stability when you have sort of peak demand and trough production, as well as helping reduce the emissions associated with legacy industrial energy production processes like oil and gas.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Marty, I have a question for you. So recently, Goldman Sachs came out with a report about digital currencies, which was called Crypto New Asset Class. There was a lot of information in 41 pages there, and yet there was no interview with any of Bitcoin miners. So they talked more about Bitcoin than anything else there. So if you were an ambassador of Bitcoin mining community and you were interviewed by Goldman Sachs for that report, what would you tell them?
Bitcoin mining is going to be one of the most one of the biggest drivers of transformation across the whole energy sector of anything since we stopped using whales as oil and found petroleum. It is again, like we said earlier, it makes us extremely energy efficient, whether it be with fossil fuels or renewables. And it's bringing to fruition a vision that's been around for over a century, which is hey, as humanity, if we really want to level the playing field across the globe, we should have an energy backed by currency, a currency backed by energy, because energy is obviously pervasive, it exists everywhere, and it's a much fairer system if your currency is based on energy expended, or that's the way it's created, And that's what Bitcoin has brought to market. It's what Satoshi, it's Nakamoto's motor that has been brought to market and is going to transform energy. It's going to make us extremely energy efficient. As a result, it's going to uplift societies around the world, and I believe make everything very peaceful, personally.
You guys want to comment on that?
Well, your original question was about what would I say to Goldman Sachs? I would say find ways to adopt Bitcoin or you're going to lose your jobs. You're going to get disrupted.
Chase,
I like that. I like the response.
well, Chase, I'll stick with you. So if Bitcoin is going to be adopted by more and more people, that means there are going to be more miners coming to the network. That means that eventually we're still going to use more power. And keeping in mind that in the next 3 years, we're going to have halving, and then in 7 years, another halving. Do you think there are supposed to be some more technological breakthroughs, specifically in chip manufacturing industry, in order to keep the demand of power not that high, but efficiency of Bitcoin mining to grow?
Let's see. So I think there's two effects that are taking place. I think one is greater efficiency that you're seeing at the chip level. But as we're seeing, we're sort of as Moore's law is slowing, we're currently at sort of the 5 nanometer process level for the silicon foundries. This is like 10 atoms thick, right? This is like a really small scale that we're operating here. We're starting to approach like sort of the limits of the laws of physics. And so we're going to get incremental efficiencies at the chip level, but the energy demand of the Bitcoin network is going to increase as Bitcoin services more people, and there's greater adoption and is creating more financial freedom for more people across the world. And I think that's a really great thing to go hand in hand. I think there's plenty of stranded, otherwise wasted energy resources between assets like flare gas. I think there's a lot of stranded hydro. There's a lot of stranded geothermal. There's increasingly more stranded nuclear. A lot of really interesting energy resources that are otherwise being wasted that can help provide that financial freedom to global citizens.
Yeah, I agree with you. Steve, quick question. So power companies take the money. Why Bitcoin mining companies are accused of all environmental crimes?
Sorry, can you...
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's too quick. So power companies take the money from Bitcoin miners when we go and have an agreement with them to buy power. But yet we Bitcoin miners are accused of all environmental crimes.
So, why don't they mine for themselves? Is that what you're asking?
Why it's us? Why it's not utility companies?
We're all off-grid miners. We don't have to worry about those assholes, right?
Yeah, that is true to a degree. I mean, I find, my whole business model is built around getting the oil company to mine the coins. I try to build products and that are suitable for their guys to operate and own. To me, that always made the most sense, and that's what we've always focused on. And we're getting increased success with that. At the start of my business, it was not easy. It was basically us financing everything, getting our little projects going, and hoping they wouldn't kick us off the site. Nowadays, because of Crusoe's doing a great job, GAM, and there's a lot of other little guys bringing credibility to this whole thing. So at least in the oil industry, the credibility is going up, so they're starting to be more willing to invest in owning it. And so most of our customers mine the Bitcoin themselves, and we just facilitate that for them. And I think that on the grid, because you mentioned you started with the grid, I think you'll see that more as well. One thing that I'm sad to see is still sort of keeping people from adopting this, keeping industry from adopting this, whether it's utilities or oil field, is the price of computers is ridiculous. It's the supply chain is a little choked, as we all know, semiconductor industry, in fact, everything right now. That's a problem. As this gets commoditized, as you guys were talking about earlier, and these computers get cheaper, these companies will be more open to doing it all themselves because it's not that much capital. And that's why we've had the most success with our customers on old gen computers because it's not a huge capital to risk. Whereas when you get with these new S19s and they're peaking at, I don't know, like, 12,000 or I've never bought one, so I don't know, but they're peaking in that range. And that scares the hell out of someone that just wants to try it out because it's a lot of capital to risk, even for an oil company. So.
Very interesting. So since you touched a little bit, Chase, about off-grid and that's going there, I want to ask a question of the whole panel. There is a big movement of equipment from China coming right now to the United States. And we all know there is not enough power on grid to power all that mining demand that is there. Do you think a lot of that equipment can go off-grid to work with your companies, guys?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily there's not enough power. I think a lot of it is, people think it's just power of machines, but there's actually quite a bit of infrastructure that you have to build to, actually support the machines. And there's, with a big physical business like that, there's lag time in the supply chain. And, I think what you were talking about is, as far as like getting access to chips, I think there's just a massive, silicon shortage. Those problems are being resolved, right? I mean, Intel's investing $20 billion in building a new, cutting-edge, state-of-the-art foundry in Arizona. TSMC is bringing online they're spending $12 billion to bring on a new foundry in Arizona. So all of these things are sort of catching up.
Yeah. I would say that we do have an advantage compared to warehouse operations on the grid, right, where they need to build a whole new substation that takes a lot of time and lead time to build that out to take on that demand from Chinese miners. Whereas what we're doing, if you can get the factory floor humming and you can produce these containers, get the gen sets and set up the gas deals on the back end, you're not going to be able to do 100 megawatts a week, but you can say, hey, we can scale elastically. We can do two chunks of 2 to 3 megawatts over the next 20 weeks, 40 weeks, whatever it is. You don't have to wait a year and a half for a substation to be built out. You can scale into that multi-hundred megawatt operation slowly over time.
Marty, so it's interesting that when we talk to different clients and different partners of ours, they're all afraid that Chevrons and Exxons of this world are going to start mining Bitcoin and now it's going to be more centralized. So what do you say to that? Can oil and gas companies do it themselves on a large scale?
I think they can, but I don't think it matters. Like we've found out many times in the past, the miners don't control Bitcoin. So if they don't play within the consensus rules, they're going to get rejected by full nodes that dictate that consensus. I'd be more worried of the regulatory aspect, right? Like obviously the ESG thing's a big narrative right now, and I think that's like a social pressure on the network that could bifurcate the network if enough mining companies in North America sort of bend the knee and play within the framing that they're putting forth, which I personally think it's a slippery slope that we should be combating. We should just leave us alone. Like we're like, you don't pick on anybody else.
Well, I support Marty in that sentiment. On the centralizing risk that you mentioned, I think you're saying all these Chinese miners flooding over here, and will the Chevrons, the Exxons, the big companies of the world centralize? I don't think so. I mean, energy is pretty well distributed, and right now, because a lot of firms, there's a lot of firms here that are gobbling up a lot of the ASICs, snatching them up and then financing them out. I think that's more of a centralizing pressure than what we'll see from energy producers. I think long term, again, as these commoditize and energy producers start buying them themselves, I think that'll be a decentralizing pressure. I think because it's already well distributed. So that's sort of my perspective on that. I agree with Marty. I think the ESG is a centralizing effect. One aspect of it is to comply with an ESG accounting system, especially the carbon accounting system. It's an added layer of overhead on a business. That's easier for a bigger business to manage, whereas a smaller business like myself, it's not that easy to manage. And I hope to avoid it like the plague if they try to force it on us. So I'm not into that as well. And I think you do see some miners posturing right now about being carbon neutral. I'd say those of us doing what we're doing in oil field on the waste gas is absolutely the best form of mining for the environment. I think it's sort of sad to see that, people think it's okay to buy carbon offset credits to justify your coal production. I think you should be proud of your coal production. You're creating jobs. It's cheap energy. It's low utility energy. And there's a million things I could talk about on coal that I think could change a lot of people's minds on it. But I'll leave that for maybe another day.
Let me ask a question. If there was, you talk about like this carbon accounting, being an overhead for you to comply with, but like if there were an actual financial incentive where if you were to comply with it, you were able to actually earn some additional reward, what do you think about that structure?
Well, you're right. For me, like for you, for all of us, we could probably benefit significantly from directly getting carbon credits or subsidies. I do advocate to my customers, the oil companies, that you are eligible in some cases for carbon credits. In fact, one of our first customers did get the voluntary credit. I think that's sort of organized by the United Nations framework. So that was a success for them. And what I say is, okay, like this incentive is out there. It's I call it fiduciary duty to advocate that they do it. And I expect that, they'll buy more of my product. That's how I expect to profit from it. But in the general sense, all this money that's being put into, say, carbon offsets or subsidizing the clean energy stuff, that's money that is stripped from other industries and other people. So I don't consider a wealth redistribution a sustainable model. So that for me is why I'm very much against it, and I don't support it on the moral level, but on the fiduciary level with my customers, I say, look, it's there. This broker I hear can help you, and then we're out of the picture and buy our products. Hopefully, we'll see what happens.
Very nice. Dear audience, we would want to open in a couple of minutes to your questions. So if you want to ask questions to our beautiful panelists, please stop by next to the mic and ask the questions. But give us a second, I still have a couple of questions for these guys. So Marty, if ExxonMobil bought Bitcoin on their balance sheet, would their stock go up or down, and why?
It'd probably go up. I don't know. But I would imagine it go up. Obviously, buy Bitcoin on your balance sheet. Why wouldn't you use your excess gas to mine Bitcoin, which would lead to more revenues, better cash flow, higher stock price potentially. So it could go up, could go down. Markets are very irrational right now, so who knows what would happen exactly.
What do you think, Chase?
Well, I don't think they would buy Bitcoin. I think they would mine Bitcoin. So, but I do think they're under. Exxon is one of these companies where they're very, very press shy because it feels like anytime they make any sort of announcement, they just get attacked from all angles. So I think it's kind of it's a tough topic for them, I think.
Interesting. So I see we have a couple of people lined up there. Guys, please go ahead and ask the questions.
Hello, everybody.
What's up, dude?
I'm in a similar business. We've talked about ASICs, we've talked about the energy side. What about in between? The generation, that's a wonderful topic. What are your thoughts? I think there's a lot of different approaches and solutions to how you generate off of natural gas, from deals with a generator company to rentals. What are your thoughts on the future of that space?
Sure.
I think Bitcoin's going to help innovate the generator space, right? Because it's nuanced. You have to line up your generation equipment with the type of gas that you're getting. Not all gas is equal. Some is cleaner, some is dirtier. So you have to take that into consideration. You have to take into consideration what part of the country you're going to have your operation, because certain generator companies only service their generators in certain parts of the country. So those are some of the factors that go into the decision making behind that.
Yeah, personally, I'm moving my company into the generator space. Like, we build Bitcoin mines. We're going to start building generators. We already do it on the small scale, like little ones. So, in terms of building, assembling, being a power generation assembler, like the Moser, Taylors, all those guys in the world. That's what we're moving into personally, because it's so complementary of what we do. And my goal is to be an oil field service business and more than just Bitcoin mining. So that's where I'm taking it.
At Crusoe, we're a big believer in vertically integrated. So we, own, operate, and manage all of our power generation equipment. We mostly focus on larger scale type deployments. So, we work with reciprocating engines at sort of a bigger scale, typically around 2 megawatts per engine. So they're big, 16-cylinder engines, and on the turbine scale as well. So. Turbine scale can range from anywhere from 5 megawatts to they have smaller turbines, but it really starts to make economic sense above 10 megawatts, and then all the way up to 30, 60 megawatt type turbines.
I think what we're doing creates like a very high incentive to make those generators as efficient as possible and have their uptime as high as possible. And I think Bitcoin's actually going to incentivize a lot better generation equipment in the future.
Next question, please.
So earlier you guys were saying about 90% of the costs that go into an operation are energy. But out of that remaining 10%, how much are kind of what's the other part of the 10% that goes down to irregular and uncommon costs that better collaboration in the mining community itself could offset? If you have to do transportation because the government kicked you out, that's a one-time thing for a mining company, but maybe a bunch of mining companies together, that would be a very small cost for them because they maintain the service and it always runs all the time. Just kind of wondering, what are the areas where collaboration can further reduce costs and all the other tail stuff?
I think the comment of 90% of the cost is energy was related to typical grid miners. I think when you're operating off grid in the oil field, you have higher operational expenses around staff that sort of needs to, because essentially you are the power company, right? You are the utility. You're generating your own power. You need mechanics. You need electricians. You need technicians that are basically managing this equipment, taking care of it, servicing it, etc. So, from your question though around like how could we work together to kind of reduce some of those costs, we have seen significant cost per kilowatt hour of labor come down as we've gotten to bigger and bigger scale, and a lot of that's related to if we have a whole field covered by a number of mechanics, we're able to sort of spread that labor over more more sites and more engines. But I'm trying to think of other things. I mean, one of the big issues with bringing miners in is the supply chain is very reliant upon Asia. And a lot of the shipping costs and the tariffs are definitely like a cost. So if we could work with our government to get rid of those, like that would be a huge savings for all of us.
That'd be pretty dope.
The only thing I'll add is, certain service providers can help a lot. Like, especially early on in my business, I didn't have a lot of IT support. It was sort of just me being a dummy, like pecking on a keyboard. But Slush Pools helped us out. There's been a bunch of other guys helping us out over the years. That kind of thing has reduced our cost basis.
Got an advertisement for Slush Pool too.
Yeah, I'm here to shill slush.
Yeah,
Slush Pool.
Guys, we're gonna take all the questions of people who are in the line, but no more questions. We're kind of running out of time, so please be very short on the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is about difference of the energy cost of transactions on Bitcoin and transactions happening in the traditional banks with their POS, with their databases. So is there any research or data about this topic? And the second part of the question, is there any way to trace the energy resources? So if it's like nuclear power energy used or traditional for transactions of Bitcoin, is there any way to trace it and also make it like transparent and show what kind of energy was used for these certain types of transactions? Thank you.
I want to answer your first one. Obviously, the media, like I think even Elon says, transactions per second on Bitcoin is crap, and it's if that's all you're looking at, it's not that competitive. But the value settled per I published a chart for fun just to counter that discussion point. The value settled per megawatt hour is actually quite astoundingly high. It's about I think right now it's about $100,000 is settled on the Bitcoin network every block or every day, or I should say per every megawatt hour. And if you actually look at the cost of a megawatt hour, if you use standard grid pricing for a utility, it's about $50. So you're settling $100,000 at a cost of $50. It's not bad.
And to your second question, you'd have to have miners self-report, or else you had access to IP data coming from miners. You could try to guess what energy source they're using. But yeah, the only way to really know the energy source is if the miners are self-reporting. I mean, that's the beauty of Bitcoin, is you're supposed to be able to do it permissionlessly and anonymously if you want to.
Please, very short questions, one sentence, each of you, please. We are very, very much running out of time, but it's a very interesting topic. Thank you.
So Andreas Antonopoulos, who wrote Mastering Bitcoin, recently pointed out that it was not an issue of global consumption of electricity, but rather global production of electricity. What would you tell Andreas, and what would you tell Elon, since he halted the payments in Bitcoin in his website for buying Teslas? What would you tell them?
Well, I think we touched on this earlier, but when you look at stranded energy resources across the globe, they're very abundant, right? So there's very abundant energy resources. It's just about harvesting them and putting them into productive use. And that's, I think, what the three of us are really focused on. We talked about the flaring footprint. If you have 14.5 billion cubic feet a day of flaring, happening out there in the world, if we were to harness that, it's literally 8 times the amount of power consumption of the entire Bitcoin network. And that's just one energy source. And I think there's many other types of stranded energy resources that are available to be tapped into that can help grow the energy consumption of Bitcoin network. I think that's a net positive because it means it's serving more people.
And we should focus on reliable production.
Next question.
I was going to say we should focus on reliable production too. Like, it's a shame to see in the U.S. particularly states and cities decommissioning nuclear and natural gas power plants, which are extremely reliable energy production vehicles. And it's like that whole conversation needs to be had. Like, do we want reliable energy? Like, we need that. That's what drives cheap energy. And the focus is not on the ball from my perspective.
Hi, I'm Mario with Vibe Energy Systems. I used to work at ExxonMobil, and when they looked at onshore flare, this all made sense, right? But then they point to offshore, right? When can we start mining using flare gas in offshore?
Yeah.
I've been working with a company just to try to look at engineering that. I'm sure other people are as well. There's a different order of challenges there. Certainly, when you want, they also flare quite a large level of power on an offshore rig. So you have a big time space constraints. You do have other advantages that could potentially take advantage of, like water cooling using seawater to help alleviate that, like build more power dense units. Right now, based on what we manufacture, I've sort of advised them that while I have ideas on what we could do, it's a little premature for us because most of what we're doing is air cooled. And in an environment like that where you have such a corrosive, salty, let's call it seawater air, that can be very hazardous to your ASICs. So either ASICs, ASICs are improving, like Watts miners have the slab heatsink, which is much, much better design. Things like that. It's moving in the right direction, but it's still a big challenge. But I expect to hear, somebody, I don't know if Crusoe or anyone else is working on it. It's going to come.
Yeah, I think, flaring is abundant, right? I mean, we talk about the scale of it. We view it as low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot of onshore low-hanging fruit to go after. Offshore, you touched on a lot of the logistical issues. In our mind, really the only way to do offshore flare mitigation is through immersion cooling. The humidity in that salty air is just going to destroy any sort of air-cooled unit.
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of electrical regulations around like the electrical engineering that need to be overcome as well. They have like a lot higher safety threshold offshore.
Yeah,
it's going to be
cost
costly.
and logistics are like crazy, right? I mean, you have to haul everything out there.
It's the highest fruit on the tree.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's take the last question of the day.
Thanks for taking the time. Are there plans to implement the energy web chain into your mining activities? Energy web stack?
Wait, say it again?
Are there plans to implement the energy web stack into your mining activities?
No.
Can you elaborate? I don't know what that means.
Well, energy web token, the energy web chain, it's sort of it's a way for individuals to buy and sell energy on their own accord in their own marketplace.
No, we have no plans.
I would use,
just a question.
I would, if I would use a custodial service for that and not a shitcoin. That would be me.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. Last question to you: Ethereum or Bitcoin?
What's that?
Last question to you: Ethereum or Bitcoin?
No brainer.
Yeah, let's leave.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.